since recording the last video, the first of this series of 2, I've picked up a chest infection. So if the audio sounds a bit unusual, if you hear any sniffling in the background, I can only apologise now at the outset. I'll try to keep it at a minimum. Blah. Already started. Okay, to begin this video rather, we need to clean off any excess oil, which is really easy to do with oil paints because of the longer drying time and the ability to manipulate them with mixtures later on, especially when it comes to removing paint. We simply take a makeup sponge on the larger areas and we can dip it in a bit of oil thinning agent and simply wipe it across the surface of the miniature. That way it gets rid of any odd pooling marks and gets rid of everything. Next up, we need to add some more metallic detail. This is done by applying metallic wax paint, which you can buy through AK Interactive, and a very old brush, and dotting it across the surface of the miniature to create a cracked, chipped surface. Next up, we use engine grime and engine grease, both from AK Interactive. Again, these are enamel based paints, so they will need enamel thinner, and we will be big, we will be bold, we will add them to the airbrush. A tip right at the very outset: after using enamels, after using oil paints through your airbrush, I would highly recommend you give your face a good thorough scrub. And use moisturiser, because the alcohol, the enamel thinner, gets in the atmosphere, clings to your skin, and you start breaking out like a teenager. It's not a good look. Make sure that should be advice for life, right? Wash your face regularly. But especially after using this stuff, you may find your skin feels greasy and blotchy. It's because of the crap that's shot up in the atmosphere, in the air, and clung to your skin. So give your face a good thorough, but you don't need my cleaning tips. Okay, we have mixed 2 parts thinner to 1 part paint to create a very, very thin, dilute enamel layer. And we apply this atop the surface of the drop pod that has been given a layer of either heavy chipping fluid, 2 to 3 layers, again by AK Interactive, or the strongest hairspray you can find. This creates an intermediary layer that we're able to then dissolve later with water. The best thing about using enamel paint at this stage, it will not disturb any pencil marks that we put on so far. The water will only activate the enamel that we put on top of it. I'm taking a brush, using a rather large brush, and running it across the surface of the drop pot. And this will ensure we get micro beading. So this will create the atmospheric weathering we're looking for. As this drop pod hurtles through the sky, it picks up all kinds of battle damage, all kinds of just grit and dirt that exists in the sky. If you can imagine hitting the ground and this big plume of debris and crap flying up into the air and splashing against the surface. All these things we are trying to recreate here. It's a wonderful technique, and if you've made any slips up until this point, it's very easy to obscure those mistakes with this particular stage. Weathering, hiding mistakes since you first found out about weathering powder. There's a saying in there somewhere, I'll work on it, make it catchier. We'll coin a phrase together. Now, we can add 2 to 3 layers. We can keep going with this technique. After you add this, you can apply another layer of hairspray and do the same thing. You can get gradual build-up if you so chose to do this. This effect also looks great on larger vehicles that have flamer weaponry on it. So in the Volca Fenrica Mastodon tutorial, there was flamers on the side, and we discussed, in order to create a realistic blasting effect, that's an alarm going off in the background, apologies. In order to create a blasting effect on the sides, we applied heavy chipping fluid, and then we used black paint over it, and then we did exactly the same thing, exactly the same technique, removing any excess paint to create this broken, fractured appearance. Once the desired effect has been acquired, simply seal with matte varnish. Okay, next up, here comes the new magic trick, the new magic toy I've been experimenting with. We start with smoke, which is a really nice kind of grey, cool grey. I won't overcomplicate things too much. I looked at it, I thought it was a cool colour. A lot of things with atmospheric re-entry. I got a lot of inspiration from military scale modelers, especially those who work with aeroplanes, and you'll see quite often quite a lot of streaking, friction burns on aeroplanes, and this is something I wanted to introduce into the drop pod. The weathering can be quite static. From other examples that I've seen, they don't take into account the speeds or momentum that these things undergo. Atmospheric re-entry, it's a wonder there's any kind of livery left on the vehicle whatsoever. It's amazing that something with a chunk of marble on the side of it could survive re-entry into the atmosphere, but I digress. We do need to work in a little bit of realism here. So the pencil is slightly wetted with water, nothing else, they are water activated, and I drag it along the side of the vehicle. The wetter the pencil, the more pigment will be imparted. The drier the pencil, we get more of a graphite appearance to it. So if you want to front load your pencil, add more water. I recommend doing this in the shaded recesses where grime and dirt and soot would naturally build up, and once it does streak through the atmosphere. Just thinking about the dynamics of these, trying to research anything around this subject, it's plain and obvious that it's completely impossible to do what these drop pods do. But anyway, so once the pencil has been applied, we can further manipulate them. We can smooth them, we can soften them down, we can blend them, and we can drag the pigment where we want it to sit. I take a rather large flat nose brush. This is one of the cheapest brushes I could find. This isn't anything special. It's a cheap synthetic brush that I've wetted ever so slightly. It's important that the brush is damp, not wet. If it were wet, it would flood the surface and destroy all our work. And I drag it upward. I always drag the brush in the same direction. I don't move it side to side, it's always up and down to reinforce that feeling of dirt and streak bleeding up the side of the vehicle. And one of the great things with these pencils, while it's still wet on the surface, look, I can drag the pencil across and create further scorch marks. These pencils are super versatile to use, and you can use them in many, many different ways. It's not a case of using them dry or using them when wet. You can intermingle them like so. You can wet the surface you're working on and then drag them along. The more you drag it along, the wetter the brush will become. The wetter the pencil will become, and the more pigment will start to impart. Another really cool thing about these pencils is that you can layer them. It's not a case of just using it once and that's it. No, you can build up the realism. As you're seeing here, I'm building up the different tonal qualities with the dirt. I'm dragging it up, always keeping that consistent, as in quite a large deposit of I'm struggling to describe this exactly, because it's not pigment. I guess we could call it pigment. Let's call it pigment. You can leave a large deposit of pigment, and then when you run it up the side of the vehicle, it will streak just in the same way that you use oil streaking. You can do it with this. Okay, I use rubber, one of my favourite colours from the set. If you're wondering what set to buy, being the paint hoarder that I am, I bought the entire thing. I think it was like £50 on Amazon. What would that be, like $75-ish American? I'm not sure about the currencies, I'm sorry. But I would recommend, if you wanted to jump into these, try using anything that has weathering on the side of the side of the packet. I've tended so far to only use rubber, smoke, black, dark ones. I do use red later on in the tutorial to give more tonal variations to the red. It's really good for doing that, because the last thing we want to do is have a plain, boring surface. No, we need to break it up. We need to make it look interesting. We are working on the realism of the piece. We've established the tone of the red. Now it's adding that story to it. And that's what weathering gives us. It gives us the story, it gives us the narrative of the piece. And I guess the narrative here is, we will throw a brick through the atmosphere at your fortification. Okay, that's a sample of how it's done on a small portion of it. We will be speeding up the video ever so slightly. It's the same process I go through again and again, running the brush. Damn, I will keep making this mistake. I'm awfully sorry. I will keep running the pencil up the side of the vehicle to make sure that the streaks are consistent with one another. And you can overlap them with the enamels. You can overlap them with more paints. You can overlap these techniques one on top of another to create an appearance you're satisfied with. Now, the final pictures that you'll see released, I've managed to complete one plate. I still need to go back. That's some of the trickery of what you see of the presentation. I only had the time to work on one section of it, but I will be going to do the rest. So any pictures you see online, and you're a patron, you've watched this video, you'll know that the other sides aren't as developed as this. Okay, medium rust is a really nice one to use. We've done the atmospheric scoring, but rust is a different material entirely. So I intersperse light rust with dark rust, one on top of another, and drag it up along the side of the vehicle again. So we have dirt, we have grime, we have grease, and we also have rust deposits running up along the side of the vehicle. It's not only a case of using one, or thinking about one type of surface. We could also do the same. So I'm sure there'd be some kind of like mechanical grease used for the top of the struts. We can develop this even further. Okay, vivid orange. So this is to add further tonal variety to the red. You could add a sprinkle here and there, again running up along the side of the vehicle to show that maybe the paint has been repainted a few times, and added on. And that's it. We are still very much in virgin territory when it comes to these pencils and weathering techniques. There will be a lot more videos on this in the coming months. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll catch you in the next video. I hope you're enjoying the advent calendar. Bye 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 bye.